Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this thematic workshop on community wealth building and employability. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Pegs Bailey. I am the Third Sector Employability Partnership Engagement Manager and work closely with Susie Duncan from the Improvement Service on all things employability in Scotland, as well as with many others of you on this call. I'm really excited to welcome some fantastic speakers today to talk about community wealth building and employability. It's something which is probably vaguely on our radar. Maybe it's more on some of your radars than others. But we've got Naomi from Claire's to talk to us about the kind of background to community wealth building and the key principles that are involved in it. Then welcoming Anna Santucci from Scottish Government, who's going to give us an overview of what's happening with the legislative process. And then Mia, Ellen and Nicole, Mia will introduce Ellen and Nicole, and they're going to give us a bit of a taster of what it feels like when you try and put the community wealth building and employability bits together in practice. So absolutely fantastic, but also very packed schedule. So without further ado, I guess important bits of housekeeping. You will see the session has been recorded. This will go up live and we will be sharing the slides. I will keep an eye on the chat for questions, but there will be points to pause after Naomi and Anna. There'll be a point to pause for questions, and then after Mia, Ellen, and Nicole, there'll be a point to pause for questions. So you can pop them in the chat, or you can bring your hand up at that point. I think that's probably it from me. Naomi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pegs, and hello everybody. Just double checking everyone can see the slides. Yep, we're all good. Oh, it's always nice when it works. A second time running. So my name is Naomi Mason. I am the head of Scotland for CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. We are the national organisation focusing on local economies. We've been around for 40 years next year. It'll be our big birthday. And we're really passionate about thinking about how places can think about how they use their wealth and their assets to build stronger local places and local economies. We've been leading the work on community wealth building in the UK for 10 years now. And we've been working closely with the Scottish Government and local authorities within Scotland to look at community wealth building rolling out across the country. So let's get into why we need community wealth building. We currently have an economy that prioritises economic growth, and most of that is delivered via external private capital. So we're told that growth is going to reduce inequality and it'll pay for our public services. But what we're seeing, despite endless pursuit of growth, we're actually seeing higher levels of poverty, business uncertainty, and the escalation of the climate crisis. So economic growth alone can't be relied on to tackle these issues, and it can't be relied on to help reduce poverty in our places and our communities. And just to demonstrate this, the graph shows UK GDP going up to 2022. That's that pink line there, and you can see it rising. And that's mapped against the declining average income, which is that blue line at the bottom of that graph, but an increasing rate of poverty. That's the yellow line. So in short, the economic growth that we're seeing is exclusive. It's not benefiting everybody. And many of the jobs that is produced are precarious, and they're just not allowing people to fully escape poverty. And I think we can all attest to that in our work. And just to hammer home the point a little bit more, we see research from the Health Foundation showing that people with lower incomes are more likely to have poorer health outcomes. And alongside this, people who don't feel that they're connected to their communities and their places will suffer from negative health outcomes. So this really has a huge impact on people's everyday lives. I don't want to depress you all, so let's get into some of the good stuff. So community wealth building really at its heart is about thinking about our economy differently. It's trying to understand how we can make it better and ensure that wealth and its benefits flow more easily to people in communities. At its core, community wealth building is saying we need to rewire this economy. We need to make it about our people and places and not about this endless pursuit of growth, which is impossible anyway on a finite planet with finite resources. And we talk about, in the world of community wealth building, using anchor institutions or institutional anchors to harness and take forward this initiative. And when we're talking about it, we mean councils, we mean the NHS, universities, colleges, housing associations, and potentially large sector private companies as well. These places are really important because they're large employers, possibly the largest purchasers of goods and services in a locality. They control large areas of land or large assets, and they're relatively fixed. They're not going to get up and go somewhere else. So these organisations are tied to their places by their mission, by their histories, by their physical assets and their local relationships. And these are organisations that can come together over time and create anchor networks. And that's what we've been really advocating for as part of our journey with community wealth building. Of going alone is one thing, but coming together, you're stronger. And they can commit to using their economic influence to work in partnership to build place-based, local and inclusive economic development practices. And I also think it's really important to note here that word community and community wealth building. I get asked about it quite a lot. Where is the community here? And I think it's really important to understand that they can also see community anchors in our places as well. Institutional anchors, as I've just spoken about, like the council, the NHS, they're really important because of their size, their scale, and therefore they can have a significant impact. But community anchored organisations can play an equally valuable role in their places. They may not have the same level of economic power, like the scale of the NHS, for instance, but they're just as rooted in place and they can be just as bound by their connections to their local area. But that connection and that area is a community scale, and their impact actually can be sometimes disproportionately great in those places. So here are the levers of community wealth building, and I'm going to run through them. I know I'm going at a real pace here, but I'm going to run through them one by one. And the one that I believe underpins them all is plural and democratic ownership of the economy. So to challenge this current economic model, we have to populate our places with enterprises that share their profits and their surpluses more fairly with their workers, with their communities. So in practice, we're talking about more social enterprises, more cooperatives, more worker-owned businesses, as well as private business that's committed to a triple bottom line. We want more socially minded organisations because they enable the growth of economic democracy alongside a greater sense of belonging and the ownership of our places. Closely linked to this is the spending or the procurement pillar. Anchor institutions, these institutional anchors, could spend potentially billions of pounds in their local economy. And if more of that money is directed towards more locally productive forms of business, there will be benefits that you can see. And adapting those procurement processes and that decision making, it can create dense local supply chains and ecosystems of local enterprises and knocking on into local employment opportunities as well. Land and property. Land ownership matters. It's an expression of economic and political power. And here in Scotland, we've got one of the most concentrated patterns of land ownership in Western Europe, where the land is concentrated in the hands of the very few. So thinking about that from a community wealth building lens, we want more assets that are owned and managed in ways that ensure that more wealth is generated for local citizens through community asset transfers, community buyouts, or local land trusts. And we can see places take initiatives across Scotland already, whether that's through town centre regeneration projects, rewilding initiatives, or setting up community energy schemes. Wherever you see communities having direct ownership of their land or their assets, they're far better able to recirculate wealth. Finance, it's all about the money. Community wealth building seeks to increase the flow of investment within local economies by harnessing wealth that exists locally. We want to channel investment into local places while still delivering financial return. So thinking about credit unions, community shares, community bonds, mutual and community banks, community energy projects with community benefits, or investment platforms like abundance investments. And the one that's most relevant today in the topic of our conversation, employment. Thinking about the workforce or the employment pillar, anchor institutions employ thousands of people across the length and breadth of Scotland. fair pay, good terms and conditions, ensuring that jobs and vacancies and progression routes are directed towards people and communities who need them most has a tangible impact on local people. It can help to address poverty, deprivation, and inequality. And I just want to say the best way to think about these pillars is really not as separate. They absolutely entwine together, and they are holistic tools which can be used to tackle local challenges or achieve a vision of a place. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Naomi. I think that's really helpful just as a kind of good foundation of why this came about, why it matters. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be some questions, and yeah, getting love hearts coming up. So without further ado, I'm going to hand now over to Anna to talk about where this is now evolving in terms of the legislative process around community wealth building in Scotland. And then we'll get to pause for questions or reflections from what you've heard.
So hi everyone, hopefully you can see my screen here. Are the slides coming up? Yep, lovely, okay. So yeah, thanks again for everybody for joining the workshop today. Thanks for the TSI network having us. My name is Anna Santucci and I am a Senior Legislation and Policy Officer at the Scottish Government. So I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to be here to talk to you all about our journey so far in the development of the Scottish Government's approach to community wealth building, as well as to share a bit about the bill and how our approach is shaping inclusive, sustainable economic development across Scotland. So it's really nice to see so many people who have joined and are interested in hearing a little bit about employability and community wealth building in particular. So I appreciate there will be varying levels of knowledge regarding the model, and with thanks to Naomi for her really helpful background on community wealth building. I won't describe in too much detail what the model is, other than to stress that we do consider community wealth building to be an economic policy. And where things like community benefits or social value are, of course, a really key element of that. They're just one part of a whole wider economic system change agenda. So it's about thinking what and who our economy is for and how we can really maximize that economic power that some of our big anchor institutions, like Naomi mentioned, have at their disposal, and really leverage the impact of that in economic terms. So just to really briefly lay out what I'll be discussing, I'll take a few minutes to give an overview of our approach in Scottish Government to community wealth building policy development before getting on to some of the work that we have underway and the bill and some of the complementing policy areas. So here we go. Oh. There we are. So why community wealth building? Why did the Scottish Government choose to embrace this model of economic development? It really came out of ideas around inclusive growth, which was the Scottish Government's approach to ensuring that economic growth considers increased prosperity in the context of greater equity across our economy. So SG started to adopt the term around 2015, I think, and community wealth building became a really key consideration for all of SG's capital investment through core government and its agencies. The language around this evolved and deepened over time, so leans into ideas around creating a well-being economy, and by that we mean an economy that creates opportunities for all, distributes the dividends of increased prosperity in a fair and measured way, and moves away from that idea of economic success being measured solely in GDP terms. So obviously it's very easy to use this language, but much more difficult to kind of articulate what that looks like in practice, and that's where community wealth building comes in. So community wealth building is a pre-established model. It was first introduced in Cleveland in the US, and then in Preston, which is referred to as the Preston model, which I'm sure many of you may have heard of. And in essence, it's about how we can practically drive and embed inclusive growth into Scottish Government investment in a way that's tangible and action-driven. So community wealth building ties into a lot of bigger picture ambitions like the just transition and child poverty. And following on Scottish Government's commitment to introducing legislation, our team was then created to explore all those linkages. So all of this thinking came together a bit more with the publication of NSET in 2022. So that's Scotland's National Strategy for Economic Transformation. And that sets out what we'll do as a government over the course of a decade to create a more prosperous, fair, and greener economy that works for everyone. So that's with a vision for a society that's thriving across economic, social, and environmental dimensions. And the objective and ambitions for our economy that are set out by NSET really underpin the work that we do with within the team. So looking at some progress so far, the team has been in place for about 4 to 5 years, with a large chunk of those early years dedicated to driving a culture shift. So when thinking about our approach to economic development, and that's both with stakeholders as well as within SG. So we're really trying to support the understanding that community wealth building isn't about just doing something new, but rather about applying a different lens to existing public investment. And like I said, this really requires a systematic culture change. And with the inclusion of community wealth building in NSET, it was pretty essential that we're ensuring it was more concretely woven through the fabric of our national economic strategy. NSET also led to the independent review on how to increase the number of inclusive and democratic business models, or IDBMs, in Scotland. So obviously very closely linked with the inclusive ownership pillar. And that report set out a range of recommendations, including the creation of an economic democracy group to consider the proposals. So that's also part of my current role, so quite closely linked to that. In practice, SG has supported 5 community wealth building pilot areas to develop bespoke action plans. And we also understand that 28 of the 32 local authorities in Scotland have their own action plans already in place. And that's just a really promising illustration of how community wealth building is already embedded in planning, even before the introduction of legislation. At its core, though, this needs to continue to be a bottom-up approach. Local authorities and anchor institutions often know the most effective ways to drive community wealth building. They know the unique strengths and challenges of their localities best, and they've very much been the driver of this in Scotland so far, with government kind of taking that supportive role at the centre to continue how this is embedded nationally to ensure that we're creating those enabling conditions where it's in our competence to do so. So the introduction of the bill will, of course, place a duty on local authorities and certain public bodies, but the reality is that a majority are already doing it. So what the bill will do is future-proof the community wealth building approach and put a legislative platform in place to underpin that continued mainstreaming. In terms of ongoing support whilst we develop the bill, we fund the Community Wealth Building Practitioners Network, which is a platform for economic development, and a place for practitioners to come together in a structured way to discuss approaches and share learning. Feedback thus far has been that it's really a hugely beneficial forum. So that will be really key as we move towards implementation of the provisions, especially that kind of best practice sharing opportunity. We also fund the Community Wealth Building Centre for Excellence, and so that's derived from the Economic Development Association of Scotland, also known as EDAS. The centre offers a range of really good deep dive learning sessions, as well as professional development opportunities and core learning materials. So it's through both of these forums that we're really trying to support action and the sharing of best practice from areas and practitioners that are already implementing community wealth building. As I mentioned, community wealth building is a cross-cutting strategic model, so it's supported by a much broader policy framework, including areas like procurement and fair work, which have been really key levers in embedding community wealth building principles. So we work quite closely with policy officials from a range of teams to understand those linkages, and I'll touch very specifically on procurement and fair work, as these are probably the 2 other policy areas that are most relevant to the model in a Scottish context. So of course, ownership of these policies doesn't necessarily sit with us in the community wealth building team, but developments in these areas demonstrate the full system holistic approach that's really required to make the model work to deliver maximum impact. And that's true not just within Scottish Government, but also for implementation across our local economies. So everyone really has a role to play, and it's about looking at different policies and initiatives through that community wealth building lens. So there's been a lot of work ongoing across the pillars which predates any work on community wealth building, and it's provided us with a really good foundation on which our policy and legislation can build on. So the timeline on the screen shows just a number of key achievements in this policy space, starting with the introduction of the fair work first, fair work in procurement, public procurement. So fair work is a really key driver for achieving sustainable and inclusive economic growth and a well-being economy. And through the flagship Fair Work First policy, we're able to drive those practices within the devolved context. Fair work is just one example of an area with linkages to community wealth building. And while that approach, and what the approach does is it brings together these elements. So yes, these things will happen anyways, but it's about bringing them together in a more deliberate and intentional way and reframing our economic development model. So looking at procurement as well as another really key driver, like the fair work stuff, current policy and legislation has provided a really strong foundation for our community wealth building work to build on. The sustainable procurement duty, which sits in the Procurement Reform Act, requires public bodies to consider and act on opportunities to achieve economic, social, and environmental outcomes through procurement. So this is all with the aim to facilitate access to procurement for SMEs, the third sector, and also to promote innovation. The duty also ensures that public contracts deliver on these benefits while encouraging SMEs' involvement, innovation, and community benefits, all of which kind of helps make procurement a really valuable tool for socioeconomic transformation and links to community wealth building in a lot of ways. So with that background, let's move on to a bit more about the bill. The Community Wealth, the Program for Government in 2024 set out our commitment to introducing a bill. The legislation aims to retain more wealth locally, reduce inequality, and ensure consistent implementation of community wealth building model across Scotland. So legislation also really crucially solidifies the Scottish Government's embrace of community wealth building as an approach to economic development and a key tool to build and boost the Scottish economy. As you'll probably be aware, the bill was introduced in March of this year, following a really extensive public consultation in 2023 and engagement with stakeholders, anchor organizations, and local authorities. That's been really crucial to the process thus far. It's a landmark bit of legislation which will continue to support the implementation of community wealth building more cohesively across Scotland. And in this way, it helps to create the conditions that support entrepreneurs, businesses, all to thrive and create that wealth that improves not only their businesses, but also the local economy as a wider benefit. So looking at the proposed bill in a little bit more detail, there are 3 overall provisions. The first provision outlines a duty for Scottish ministers who will be required to develop and lay in Parliament a statement on community wealth building. This statement intends to set out the measures that we would intend to take in relation to community wealth building. And as such, that will help achieve the systematic culture shift that I spoke about earlier and kind of further embed community wealth building as a key part of our wider economic development approach. Ministers will also be required to publish community wealth building guidance. So that will help with the development of community wealth building action plans. So both the statement and the guidance will be reviewed periodically so that they stay progressive and relevant, as well as those action plans that will be developed. The second provision is for community wealth building partnerships, and that refers to local authorities and the relevant public bodies related to them, so that kind of partnership grouping of those. These partnerships will be asked to develop action plans, and with the help of the guidance, it will set out the measures the partnership is taking or intends to take to facilitate and support the generation, circulation, and retention of wealth in the local economy. And then third, and finally, the bill introduces a duty of due regard. So, and that's specified public bodies. Due regard basically means that these specified public bodies should consciously consider the community wealth building guidance when developing their corporate plans. So this harkens back to what I'd said kind of about encouraging policies and initiatives to be viewed through that community wealth building lens. There are already so many initiatives that are happening locally that have those linkages to community wealth building. So it's about supporting public bodies to see how actions can support the aims of community wealth building, even if they're currently being badged as something else. Right, so community wealth building as an approach, it's really important that it's not one size fits all. Action plans and strategies will need to focus on the needs, opportunities, and those really unique challenges that are faced by specific localities. But as part of that, we recognize that as with any relatively new policy, there's the question of, okay, but how do we achieve all this? So, the bill proposes some practical measures to advance community wealth building that can be used to address specific local needs. And these may include anything from procurement to support local economies, promoting equality and workforce development, encouraging community ownership, and revitalizing vacant land. There's also a really big role here for supporting entrepreneurship and alternative business models like co-ops and social enterprises. And that's what I touched on that briefly at the start regarding our economic democracy group, which is also linking and supporting on that initiative. And the guidance that's being developed is also taking into consideration all of the valuable submissions that we received through the community wealth building public consultation and the call for views in terms of providing those examples of best practice in a really clear and concise, roadmap of sorts on how community wealth building can be tangibly implemented in a way that translates to real change in our local economies. In terms of next steps, just a really quick overview of a bill's journey through Parliament, because I know that might not be common knowledge. It includes 3 main legislative steps, of which we're currently in stage 1. So we expect this stage to be completed by the 21st of November, as agreed by Parliament in April. Stage 1 begins with the introduction of the bill, which happened in March of this year, and includes some really important early stage kind of framing discussions in the form of evidence sessions. So it's during these sessions that representatives from stakeholders, different academics, local authorities, public bodies, they've all been invited to share their views and concerns regarding the bill to the committee, which will be overseeing the bill's journey. So from introduction, hopefully to royal assent and commencement. All of these sessions are publicly available on the Parliament's website. So I would really encourage people to actually have a watch of these, because as with the consultation responses, the sessions continue to provide the team with really valuable insight into what people really want to see the bill and guidance achieve, and what challenges and obstacles we'll need to anticipate. Stage 2 involves a little bit more of a rigorous discussion within the lead committee on amendments to the provisions as they've been introduced thus far. At the moment, we're not quite sure what amendments might be launched regarding the bill, but it's about taking all that feedback from pre-introduction and stage 1 on board so we can kind of help further develop a bill if needed through the subsequent stages. Stage 3 is approximately 2 months later, and there will be a chamber debate regarding the amendments that have been put forth, and then all going well, the bill will be granted royal assent and finally at commencement. So it is a long process, but it's a really important one because it allows for continued engagement with stakeholders throughout, and especially for a bill like ours, it's really important because community wealth building really only works with local engagement and buy-in. So we want to make sure the bill reflects the feedback and views that we've received as much as possible. Right. So before I finish up, I just wanted to flag that the stage 1 report on the bill was just published last week. It's a really comprehensive but pretty digestible overview of the stage 1 evidence sessions and all that really valuable feedback that the committee heard. So I would encourage people with an interest in the bill to have a read of that. I won't try and say it better than the committee convener, but the bill is really such a huge step in shaping inclusive, sustainable economic development across Scotland. And I'm really glad to have had a chance to share a bit more about it with you all today. So that's our email. I know we have some time for questions at the end, but just in case people want to follow up, I'll make sure that's shared. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I can't believe you managed to condense so much information into that short sort of 10 minutes that we gave you, or 15. Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few questions that have come up in the chat. For others, also feel free to raise your hand. I'll just pick those 2 out. So first of all, there was a question about, a very practical question about the 4 local authorities that you mentioned, that there were 28 that had implemented already stuff. And there was a question of like, do we know who the 4 are that haven't?
So because we've not introduced the legislation yet, we're not, we've not kind of done a proper evaluation, but it's just kind of hearing that there are things that are being badged as community wealth building initiatives that are already taking place, whether people kind of recognize them as being part of a wider action plan. But yeah, we do kind of know who they are, not to make that sound ominous in any way, but we're supporting them as best we can. And it's about sharing best practice. So the local authorities that already have, community wealth building embedded, sometimes they have community wealth building officers that are already employed. It's about sharing, how we can make that really tangible and effective action come to life in places that might not be as far along in the process.
Brilliant. I think that's a really useful point. And actually, you used a phrase about being deliberate and intentional that sometimes, especially when it comes to employability, when we were looking at this, like there will be lots of things that are happening in that field that will meet community wealth building priorities, but it's happening without it being explicitly linked. So that and when things become deliberate and intentional, it feels like there's space to grow and do more of it. So the next question was just, I think somebody's answered it, but the community wealth building practitioners network, is that just for local authorities or can other organizations join?
Yeah, no, I believe it's open to a number of other organizations. So I'll have to double check with my colleague on the policy side. I work more on the legislation side, but she'll be able to, refer anybody who's interested to how you can best get involved. But I know for a fact that there's a lot of organizations that are a part of that. And again, it's just about sharing best practice, because with something that's relatively new, like community wealth building, it's sometimes difficult to recognize what that looks like more tangibly. So it's about just opening up those communication lines and trying to get groups together that can share, ways that they're actioning.
Thank you. Now I see Natalie, you from The Haven, you've got your hand up. And also just to say to people, you can also ask questions of Naomi too. She's here as part of this bit. So yeah, Natalie, over to you.
Hopefully that's worked. Can you hear me? Because last time I was on a Zoom call, my microphone just was unable to work. Thank you so much, because there's so much talk about community wealth building, and it seems to be like this amorphous ball that people don't quite know how to come at. And it sounds really good, but people still don't understand what it means. So that was much more comprehensive than some of the things I've come across. I've got lots of questions. My first one is sort of like, could be directed somewhere else, but has community wealth building in Scotland kind of come out of things like wind farms in the Highlands and Islands? Because it seems like a concept that already has some kind of framework in place that is just sort of being built upon. My other question would be, it sounds like there's a lot of reliance on local government authority to be the conduit of that. And what do you do as a third sector organisation when that that local government authority is not as competent as it could be, and potentially misappropriation of public funds. And also, I'm sort of tied up with procurement as well, that I worry that the third sector is being offloaded a lot of issues and problems by entities that are meant to be delivering things that are then being kind of like offloaded onto the third sector to deliver for them and provide solutions. And also, like, the community wealth building bill's great, but unless that has financial backing, the third sector can't really do anything with it. And, you know, so is there going to be construction of things like grants to social enterprises, no interest loans, things like that, to help build that capacity and keep the finance being competently managed by the third sector organisations that need access to it? If that doesn't make any sense, I apologise.
That might be a discursive essay, Anna. So yeah, I'll let you answer that as best you can. Naomi, you may want to come in on that as well, and then we might have to wrap it up there. But folks do have people's email addresses, so yeah.
I'll make sure that the email address is shared as well, because that might be something that I can liaise with some other colleagues about. So specifically about the wind farms, for example, I know that's stuff that our colleagues in the climate change division are working quite closely on, that community ownership and making sure that money is recycled back into communities, and also kind of working on that just transition. So trying to make sure that there's an uptake in renewable energy generation and everything like that. So that's definitely something that I can get you more information about. It's the provisions of our bill are particularly set out so that it encourages these partnerships to be looking at the specific, challenges and opportunities in their local areas. So, as part of your second point in terms of, how do we make sure that there's, not misappropriation of funds and that people are working together, it's about a really big part to play for, actors across the piece. So, those anchor organizations that Naomi spoke about, it's about kind of everybody coming together in these local areas, recognizing where there's gaps, where there's opportunities. Anchor organizations, for example, have, a lot of economic agency. So they're in a good place to kind of help develop plans a little bit more and make more action. So yeah, it's kind of across the piece. Legislation is just one part of a very, long-term approach. It's about kind of solidifying community wealth building as a real thing. It's especially with a relatively new policy approach, it's kind of important to solidify it so that governments going forward recognize it as as a part of our economic development model. So you'll have to remind me of your third question.
It might have been about outsourcing problems to the third sector. It was probably more about like how to back up policy, how policy gets backed up with on the ground grants and funding and like no interest loans that can then enable any kind of community asset transfer to actually be sustainable long term. Like how do those sorts of things get constructed in a way that are practical and useful?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we heard a lot through, the public consultation concerns regarding capacity and resource. Those are things that we're definitely listening to and things that we're definitely developing with our policy colleagues. So yeah, just of course, the bill is only in the first stage, so there's always changes that can be made. The guidance will also have a really big part to play in terms of helping people develop a bit of a roadmap to what they can do within their capacity. We definitely have been talking a lot with COSLA, for example. We don't want to be putting more of a burden on local authorities that are potentially don't have capacity to do monitoring evaluation for another duty. So we're trying to make sure that we're able to achieve the aims of community wealth building without putting an additional burden. And that's what I kind of meant about there are things that local authorities especially are already doing that could be badged as community wealth building. And it's just about people understanding the lens through which you can see all of these really beneficial actions and kind of be able to badge them in community wealth building in certain ways. So.
Okay, I'm aware we've gone over a little bit on time, so I think that could be a whole workshop. Really interesting and important discussions. Naomi, if you have thoughts on that you'd like to add, are you okay to add that in the chat? And Anna, also there is a question in the chat if you wouldn't mind having a quick look about the Centre for Excellence. But I'm really keen that we get to talk about some places that are actually been putting this into practice and kind of making it real. So I'm going to hand over to Mia to introduce our 2 case studies.
Thanks, Pegs, and hi everyone. My name's Mia and I'm Community Wealth Building Project Officer at the Improvement Service. So as part of my role, I did a mapping exercise looking at community wealth building practice across Scotland, but also as part of my role, I provide secretariat to that Community Wealth Building Practitioners Network that was mentioned earlier by Anna. And just to kind of clarify with the questions, it's currently got just the local authorities and the economic development agencies and Public Health Scotland sitting on there. But if you're interested in hearing more about that, please get in touch. I'll put my email in the chat. Yeah, I'm just briefly introducing our 2 case studies today. And yeah, without further ado, I'll pass over to Nicole Grant, who's Senior Employability Advisor at the NHS Lanarkshire. Over to you, Nicole.
Thank you. I think someone else has shared my slide since it wasn't working earlier. Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Grant. I'm the Senior Employability Advisor and Job Coach Lead at NHS Lanarkshire. And today I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of our demonstrator programme that has been running this is in its 4th year, and we've had 3 successful programmes. Move on. So for those of you who don't know about the programme, it is aimed at unemployed parents or parents with a low income. And this is really tying into obviously community wealth building, because we've obviously got a goal of inclusive economic participation and local job creation, and this programme really does feed into that. We have a focus on family friendly hours for people coming in. So even if they're in a clinical role, we could be offering hours that fit in with childcare responsibilities, such as, you know, a 10 till 2 if they were dropping the kids off at school and then coming, having to go and pick them up after. We have a focus on pre-employment training, which is delivered by the referral providers. So I'm going to talk about this in a wee second, but we do have a partnership approach with our employability partners. So we host the placements in NHS Lanarkshire, but we link in with Routes to Work Limited and South Lanarkshire Works and North and South Lanarkshire Council on this programme, and it's a great example of the partnership approach in our local authority areas. The pre-employment training is things like such as preparing them for coming into the workplace, as well as workplace expectations and job-specific training as well. And we also give them a lot of support through the recruitment process. We understand that people who might not have been in a job for a while or applying to the NHS can be difficult, so we give them guided information sessions and application support as well. We also prepare our managers for taking on people on this programme, and that's a really big part of this. If you've got managers in a clinical setting, they're going to be very, very busy. They're dealing with their own staff pressures, delivering services to patients. So we deliver information sessions and have manager information packs to help managers and mentors of this programme support the people coming in the best way that they can. And I think that's really crucial, because you're not only wanting to bring these people in, you want to make sure that on their placement, which is for 6 months, and it's a paid placement, that they're coming in and they're getting the best experience possible. We have a focus on entry-level roles. So these can be, and I've got these on the screen here, so we've got statistical technical officers in cardiology and pharmacy, porters, domestic assistants, catering assistants, admin assistants, and healthcare support workers / assistants as well. So there's varied roles that they can come into. A big part of this programme is the wraparound support for managers and programme participants. So everyone on the programme gets allocated a job coach from my team, and they then support them by checking in with them monthly, and we run employability workshops and things like that for them to develop their employability skills. And we also still have the referral providers, the employability partners, Routes to Work and South Lanarkshire Works, supporting the individuals if they do need any extra support as well, out with what we can offer in the NHS. So for example, imagine they were struggling with childcare or financially, they would come in and support them there. And it's a really great example of a partnership approach, because obviously as part of community wealth building, we really want to be looking at, you know, the local ecosystem and supporting people together as partnerships across our local authorities. And this is a great example of how this can work successfully. So we'll move on. So reach and inclusion. So as you'll know, which was highlighted earlier, NHS is an anchor organisation, and this programme plays a significant part in that because we expand access to meaningful employability opportunities across our local communities in partnership, and it is deeply committed to breaking down barriers and supporting our most vulnerable groups to find and sustain high quality, fair paid and fulfilling work. And it links to Scottish Government's No One Left Behind policy and tackling child poverty agenda, along with our own widening access strategy. The target group for this programme is unemployed and low-income parents, including single-parent families, those with 3 or more children, babies under 1 and young mothers. But the programme indirectly targets people in other target groups, such as ethnic minorities and those who've been long-term unemployed. So we find that the programme has a wide reach. And as an anchor organisation, we really do want to support local communities as much as possible, and we find that this programme is a great example of that. We'll move on. So some of our job outcomes and earnings for the third programme. So 80% of people of those who participated in the last programme, which ran from October until October last year till March this year, 80% of people moved into positive destinations. So 29 of those of the 40 of the 38 that started stayed in an NHS board or ISS who we run the programme with as well. One moved into further education, one moved into another employability partnership role, and we find that the outcomes for the previous programmes, they were sitting at about 70% for the first 2 programmes of positive destinations, so we've built on that, and I think that's due to having monthly meetings with our referral providers and employability partners to talk about the caseload of people and on the programmes, and also through the intensive support from the job coaches and the managers and buddies that they have in their department. 80% of participants who filled out at the end of programme evaluation cited increased earnings and improved finances as one of the main benefits of the programme, which again, we're really wanting to promote fair work and increase earnings and things like that. And we find that the fact that participants are saying it's improving their financial situation is brilliant. Move on here. Social impact and social and wellbeing impact. So half of the respondents at the end of the programme survey cited improved health and wellbeing as a benefit, but that does not account for informal positive feedback. Because we find that at the monthly one-to-ones with their NHS job coach, they often talk about the fact that it's improving their health. We had one woman, for example, that started in a porter role, and she was pre-diabetic, and from doing the porter role and doing 20,000 steps a day, she improved her health, and she said it really improved herself getting back into a routine after a number of years out of work. So that's just a little informal example. 15 out of the 38 participants disclosed having a health issue, mental or physical health issue, when they started the programme. So it's interesting to hear that it has improved their health greatly. We've got a participant here, Leslie Ann, and she talks a little bit about it has made me feel so much better about herself. It's not just improved finances, but it's been great for my mental health. She gets up every day and she feels a lot more better. She's in work now. She'd actually lost her son, and he was actually cared for at the hospital she worked at, so that was really challenging, but she felt through all the support from our department, she ended up turning the fact that she'd went through that experience into a positive when working with the patients, and she felt that it was she could put all her skills to good use, and she then stayed in employment with us in the assistant technical officer role at Monklands after the programme, which was really great to see as well. Okay, can we move on? Skills and education. So 100% of participants that completed the programme this year completed their Learn Pro modules, which is our online training academy in the NHS, and our healthcare support worker booklet, which is what we put through all our individuals when they come into the NHS. So we're getting that NHS mandatory training. Those in a clinical role received their healthcare support worker induction and manual handling training, and that's just to prepare them for those clinical roles, so we make sure they get that training as well. We also offer job-specific training, so for example, if they were to take blood, so they get their phlebotomy training, maybe they would need training on our admin systems and things like that as well. Pre-employment training was also provided by the referral partners routes to work in South Lanarkshire Works, and that could account for things like customer service, health and safety, manual handling, food hygiene and workplace expectations. and we also run employability workshops for them throughout the programme. So we usually run them bi-monthly, so they get 3 workshops in the 6 months, and they cover things like interview skills, goal setting and things like that for after the programme. So we really make sure that while they're in there for the 6 months, they're getting on the job training, but they're also getting training courses when required as well. And we'll move on. Overcoming barriers and challenges. So sometimes some of the barriers that we had was a lack of understanding of the programme within departments. So for example, maybe our managers agreed to take on people and then other people in the department might not understand that that's staff members on an employability programme. So we've developed intensive manager information packs that they can share with our teams, and also run online sessions that people can come into to find out more about the programme before people start. Participants might not feel fully prepared for the programme, so although they got the pre-employment training at the start when we first started running this in year 1, we didn't provide a group induction, whereas now we run an intensive group induction for a couple of days for them to get to know each other, so that they can come and they get to know each other so that they can build those relationships and be prepared for their roles. Ability to sustain work after the programme when hours might not be as flexible. So for example, they come in child-friendly hours, but then, for example, those hours might not be available afterwards. So it's linking in with employability partners to help them with things like childcare and stuff. Ability to sustain the programme. So the referral process has been refined with employability partners. So we make sure that those coming into the programme are ready to come onto the programme. And planning next steps can be stressful, so we offer something called a redeployment process to help match them to vacancies in the NHS, and they also get support from their NHS job coach and employability providers as well. And I think that might leave me on to the end anyway. I think that was a 1 minute warning. And yeah, I just want to say thanks for listening. If anyone has any questions, and I don't know if we're doing that at the end or the next presentation, but
thanks, Nicole. That was such a brilliant example of a programme that's developed over time, and a really great example of using your anchor lever to create good quality jobs for people that need it most. So yeah, moving on to our next case study, I'll just pass over to Ellen Munro, who's Head of Integrated Employer Engagement for the City Region Deal, to tell us a bit about how they're embedding community wealth building priorities into the City Deal. Over to you, Ellen.
Yeah, are we sharing? Is that good? Yeah, good. Yeah, thank you for having me today. For those of you that I don't know, my name's Ellen Munro, and I'm employed within the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region Deal, and my case study is looking at how we are linking our community benefit obligations through the deal through to our community wealth building strategy. And we're moving on. My screen has frozen. Has anyone else got this? Are we moved for anyone else? Can someone say?
It's not moved on for us, no.
Is it now?
Oh, yes.
That's caught up. Good. Apologies. Yes, okay. So for a little bit of context, for those of you that aren't familiar, our city and growth deal covers the 6 local authorities, Edinburgh, Lothians, Fife and the Borders, and it's a £1.5 billion investment programme across 15 years, and that is a UK and a Scottish Government programme. It is significantly weighted towards capital projects, but there is a revenue element with skills. The skills element covers 8 years. The role that I have within the skills programme is looking at how we embed community benefits across the full capital programme. So when we started this project in 2019, we took this very seriously. We thought, how can we make sure we get the most out of this investment into our region? So we did what we always did with community benefits and made sure those obligations were as clear and fair for each local authority as possible. In 2021, we created a portal to allow for more matching between charities, third sector employability providers and the supply chains within our deal. When the deal was written and the business case was written, community wealth building wasn't really a huge thing in our space. So it wasn't acknowledged within our business case. But in 2022, we thought, right, we should really be doing something and making that change. So we engaged CLES and brought them into the fold with us and said, right, what can we do? What are we doing well already? What could we learn from you? Can you give us some suggestions? And how do we take this forward? So working with CLES, we created a framework for action. And what we did was we took that to all of our city deal leads. So that's the local authorities, it's the universities, it's the colleges, it's all the stakeholders in our space, and said, right, we want to make sure this investment that is within our area needs to stay there, and how do we make that happen? So alongside the framework, we created a pledge commitment document. And we pulled out 3 of the priorities that we thought we could have more influence in this space. One of which supporting growing the development of SMEs, others looking at employee-owned businesses, cooperatives, social enterprises, and the third one being around progressive employment opportunities. So we took this pledge ask and we took it to the different leads within the deal and said, right, we need to make sure we're using this money wisely, and how do we make sure the opportunities are stayed in the local authorities that the builds are happening, but also across the whole region. And there was no hesitation. First of all, Fife Council, as one of the pilot local authorities through Scottish Government's Community Wealth Building Pilot, jumped at that and said, yes, we want to make sure we're showing we're doing the right thing here and really share best practice. So the Fife I3 programme committed first, which was great. We then brought the ask into the programme management office for the full deal, and also the skills programme. We have got control of that money that's going through the skills programme. So how do we make sure employability services are benefiting from it, and how do we make sure that wealth is retained? And then just not too long ago, we had the commitment from the regional HE and FE group within the area. So Sir Peter Matheson from Edinburgh University signed the pledge commitment on behalf of all the unis and colleges within our region. Now, why that's important is because the universities essentially have the bulk of the deal funding through the capital projects, through a lot of the innovation hubs. So you may be familiar with the Robotarium, Edinburgh Futures Institute, and buildings like that. So it's really great that they have now committed to this as well. And then where we kind of can take this and bring it to life is looking at a project that we've had full involvement with the build throughout the community benefit, design and delivery. So Edinburgh Innovation Hub is a joint venture between East Lothian Council and Queen Margaret University, based out in Musselburgh. So we worked really closely with the contractor to say, right, we have these community benefit obligations that we have written in partnership with yourself and with the local authority, but how do we make sure we take those and we pull them back in line with our community wealth building priorities? So we took different categories, linked that back through to the local authority needs and priorities set by the procurement team, and we did a whole host of activities looking at procurement in the early stages. How do we make sure local businesses get access to this spend? And as a result, there's a huge focus on local supply chain, and the amount of East Lothian and regional businesses that have benefited from that have been great. Without going into too much detail, we're looking at employability within the construction phase. We know the construction phase is limited. We know that that is about to hand over. What happens when that hands over and the doors are open of the hub? How do we make sure that continues? So we really want to shout about the good stuff that's happened. Over 66% of the workers on the construction site have been from the region. That says 27, but I got new data through this morning. 144 people working on the site actually reside in East Lothian. They created 3 new additional roles specifically linked to this ask. They are all from our priority client groups, and the list is endless. The contractor's been really open to working with us on this. But that is now coming to an end. It's handing over in the next day or so. So when the doors open and when the hub is trying to encourage more businesses in, we're saying, right, what's going to happen now? There's no question mark over that. They're going to continue with this driving forward the community wealth building priorities and ethos. They ultimately want to bring in local talent, they want to bring in local investment, and they want to grow that wealth in the region. So we're taking construction through to doors open and going to continue that wealth through that programme. So that is my 5-minute whistle-stop tour of our project. If anyone has any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Oh, thank you so much, Ellen. When we first were planning this, we thought, oh, an hour should be enough. And I am completely regretting this now. There's been so much content, and I know there will be questions people want to ask. Because time is tight, if you can pop them in the chat, and people can take time to answer them, and we will also send out everybody's email addresses where they've shared them. Are there any burning questions that people want to share in the group now? Because I am under strict instructions to also make sure I share the evaluation and the forthcoming thematic workshops, or be cursed forever by Jane Chappell, who isn't here. So yeah, I can see that there are questions coming up in the chat about the offboarding or the kind of the supporting for parents. So hopefully, Nicole, you'll be able to pick those up, and Ellen. Angela, I see your hand up, so we'll give you that. And in the meantime, while that question's happening, if Andy can, well, we need to be at the end slide, Andy. If Andy can pop the evaluation in the chat as well. You might need to, we'll get there. Okay, Angela, do you want to ask your question while we're kind of going through psychedelic?
It's very quick. Are we going to be sent the slides?
Yes.
That's great.
Absolutely.
That's great. There you go. Quick as a cat. Thank you for the whole session. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks. That is the kind of question I can answer. Ellen and Nicole, there are a couple of other questions in the chat as well, if there's anything that you could just take a minute to answer. And Andy's going to pop the link to the evaluation, I think, also in the chat. These are some forthcoming sessions. We've got one around service design, one about DWP and job centres, everything you ever wanted to know but never dared ask, and obviously the Third Sector Employability Forum, which is a very important and great place to connect with other providers. Kirsty, I see your hand is up.
Hi, Ellen. I was just to say that's a fantastic presentation. I actually work in construction myself and attended a CITB launch event for the community wealth building. And we met up with lots of local authority representatives and lots of tier 1 construction companies. I was distraught at the event at how much people were misunderstanding what this key piece of legislation actually does. The local authorities were going in with a tick list of all the things that they really should actually be providing themselves. But now they're dead excited that these tier 1 companies will come in and do. And they weren't understanding the actual purpose of the community wealth building. And then with the tier 1 companies that the CITB had engaged in Scotland, they were national companies. They were national companies with no community roots. They were telling us about how many hours of training they gave their staff members and how that was a direct impact to the community. But the people were coming up from Manchester. It was just so see, even your slides that have said no, it's about working in your local communities. It's about giving the local businesses and social enterprises, if they're a construction company and they're doing a massive project in your area and those people need lunch, they come to a social enterprise within your community and they make that arrangement and they get that procurement in place to buy locally. What they don't do is use national companies to go and do that. And even in all of the examples that they were given us and all of the breakouts, it was still national social enterprises that were doing things rather than community enterprise. And I think people are not understanding maybe the actual, importance of that, the making people resilient. So it's not about going to companies and going, right, we were talking about wind farms earlier on. It's not about going to wind farms and saying, give us just this money, because they put limits on how you can spend it. It's about building resilience in your communities. And so the things that you have went and showed in yours, that shows the resilience in communities because you've trained up people in the local area who are going to be better. And, one of the examples that had that CATB was I gave a school 200 Christmas presents. Therefore, ergo, and community wealth building. Well, those kids opened up those Christmas presents and use it for a day. That is not community wealth building. Giving them something to actually, helping them build a community cafe that can continue to operate, or upgrading a community cafe that can continue to operate. That is community wealth building. It's about getting people using local resources. So just really, really well done. That's the kind of project that inspires, and you can see what they can actually do, and the impact and how much that's trickling down to the communities. So it's not really a question, but it was just to point out.
Oh, thank you.
Just don't understand what this is.
I think that's really important. I know we're over time, Pegs, but if I can just respond to that for 1 minute, if that's okay. Where we find being as part of a city deal and a growth deal, we've got the ability to do that influencing. I know we're less restricted whether if we were sitting in a local authority. However, what I would say is it's really clear at the start that we need to say what's the difference between community benefits and community wealth building, that we can use community benefits to instill that systematic change and encourage. And like you say, on the hub, and I know Angela's on this call, on the hub, the bricklaying contract was a local East Lothian business. Now, anyone that works for that and lives in the area and they're involved in that can drive past that every day and say, I built that, you know, and it has that sense of pride and ownership in keeping that wealth local. But thank you for your comments, and happy to pick up with you separately if you think it would be useful at any point.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to all our speakers. I'm really gutted that we didn't make this an hour and a half. I really appreciate Naomi, Anna, Ellen and Nicole and Mia for giving up their time to share the big stuff and also the making it real stuff. Yeah, if people want to find out more, we will share the slides. There is an evaluation also, so if there's things that you'd like us to run further workshops on or have a bit more of a deep dive on, just let us know. We can try and help make that happen. And I think that is probably it. I need to let you all get on to your next meetings, but thank you again. Cheers.